Welcome to the Mavens of Marketing, a weekly podcast hosted by me, Rachel Durkin.
And me, Kerry Barrett. We talk all things marketing, innovation, sales, and business growth strategies, and the standard tried and true marketing techniques.
Come for the conversation, stay for the savvy insights.
And the borderline inappropriate jokes. I was going to say good morning, but I don't know what time you're listening. So good morning, good afternoon, and good night. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Mavens of Marketing. I'm Kerry Barrett along with Rachel Durkin. How are you?
Good morning or afternoon or evening. I'm great. How are you, Kerry?
I'm all right. Like we're keeping all of our options open.
Mm-hmm.
We have the lovely Vicki Harte who's joining us today.
Hello. I'm just going to say happy hour because somewhere it is happy hour.
That's damn straight.
Tell the group, Vicki, your rules on happy hour.
Oh, well, a number of years ago when parenthood was bestowed upon me and it was 10:30 in the morning and I started looking at I'm like, oh my gosh, I just use a drink. And then I looked at it and said, oh my gosh, it's 10:30 in the morning. So in was born the rule of 4 o'clock or 4 adults and happy hour can begin. And I have to tell you, it's kept me on the straight and narrow. There are a couple overriders like natural disasters, of which a pandemic is one. So full disclosure, party time can happen anytime you want. Acts of God and birthdays, vacations. So those overrides, you
and also don't forget that 2 children counts as 1 adult.
Yes,
so if you
2
have
kids count as 1
6
adult.
kids, that's
so
an
if
exception.
you run a daycare, ride free, citizens, ride free.
Just a disclaimer, we don't support that statement.
No.
Not really, but you do what you want.
Listen,
I hope you have insurance.
This is a judge-free zone.
Find no judgment in this group. And that's how we have managed to survive for, gosh, a little bit more than a year now in terms of the pandemic. I cannot believe that it was about 54 weeks ago when I naively thought that this was really only going to last 2 weeks. Was anybody else there with me?
I think I was thinking like a month and I was like, oh, it'll be over eventually, maybe 3 or 4 months. But I definitely saw an end date. I don't think I had any idea what was going to come of this.
I did not foresee 3 months or 4 months. I was like, oh, maybe a month, but this was a bit of a mind blow, I would say.
Yeah, a bit of a mind blow. And it's interesting. I remember Vicki and I did a summit with Rachel when the pandemic first started. It was a day-long virtual summit, and I remember at that point the words that everybody was saying, and I thought, oh my God, I'm already tired of hearing them, and they're going to go away. Pivot, gag me, and new normal, also gag me. And let's add a third to that list: Zoom fatigue.
Stop saying it. We had to make up new words for that. We should start bleeping those out. From now on, if you say the word pivot in this podcast, you're going to get out.
Yeah, or like we could do a shot. You know what?
Oh no, I like where this concept is going. Again, acts of God.
There's only 3 of us, and for those who are listening, we're recording this at 9 a.m. So
I'll bring in 2 of my kids, and then we're.
You know what though? I have to say, I'm a big fan of thesaurus and synonyms and trying to find, unique words or better words when there's overused words. There actually was really no better word than pivot. Everything else felt
it was right.
Everything else, and it still does. I mean, regardless of the emotional response that you have to pivot, there is no better word. Shift gears doesn't sound as powerful. And when you're really trying to do any kind of, what we experience as a collective, somebody one time posted on Facebook, we're not in the same boat, we're in the same storm. And it was really powerful in the way, like, we have friends who were like cut off at the knees, like immediately, like their businesses stopped. And, we experienced, and Rachel and I had a lot of conversations, and she drank more than she usually did. I was kind of like par for the course, but we were drinking, like we suffered losses immediately from it. We were cut off at the knee. Many of our friends and networking friends and fellow businesses were cut off at the knees. And like immediately their businesses were affected. And, Rachel and I had lots of conversations during that time. And, we were definitely drinking. Maybe Rachel was drinking a little bit more. My drinking behavior didn't really change at all.
I'm not a big drinker
because I
normally,
drink more than she does.
So, well, Vicki, before we get too far into the real conversation of this podcast, introduce yourself to the audience and tell them a little bit about yourself.
Well, okay, I can do that. I am Vicki Harte, Director of Client Engagement at Paradigm Marketing and Design. And I am charged with, I don't really consider myself a salesperson. I consider myself an educator. I network, I connect, I meet people, and I talk with them about what marketing is. And one of the things that I actually love about working at Paradigm, aside from many other things, and it doesn't count because even though she's on the call with me, it doesn't matter because I tell her this myself. Paradigm knows that our lid does not fit on every pot. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the magical things about us is we're not trying to jam ourselves into a situation where it doesn't fit. We're not trying to retrofit. We know what we do. We know what we do really well. And we know who our client is and who our client is.
At Paradigm, one of our big beliefs, because we work mostly with service companies with complex sales, is that it's not marketing and sales. It's marketing to sales. Like there's a funnel with a handoff and they work hand in hand together. You can't do one without the other. Yeah. And so Vicki plays a pivotal role in our transition between our marketing funnels into our sales process. Yeah. When the pandemic hit, I actually wasn't, I joked about it earlier. I was of the belief that while we might go back to some semblance of normal, that this was a long-term change. And so we made some big changes really quickly that after we were decimated in the first month, we were able to recover rather quickly because of those changes. What I was hoping to talk about today with our year anniversary is what's next. One of the things that I'm seeing is business burnout everywhere. I mean, we're worried about it from an HR standpoint. We're worried about it from a marketing standpoint. We're worried about it from a growth standpoint. As a marketing podcast, we'll talk about the marketing focus today, but the ability to be creative, the ability to plan, the ability to figure out what is next is incredibly hard right now because, and you can bleep me out, this new normal is going to change again. I kind of joked in a lot of presentations I did early in the pandemic that we were playing checkers for a really long time and we got really good at checkers. And then all of a sudden the world turned upside down. We were playing chess. Half of us didn't even know there was a new board. Half of us didn't know what the pieces were. None of us knew how to play it. Some of us have figured it out, but now we're moving into like 3D chess. If you ever watch it.
That's the other thing. It's like now that, is the vaccine rolling out or is it not rolling out fast enough? Is it going to protect against the variants? I think there was a sort of a moment where we all had this like, things
it's
are
over. It's almost over. Yeah.
And then the news hit like pretty much the next day that the vaccines are going to take longer to roll out than we thought. And there are these new variants. And what does that mean? And does it mean that we'll actually be able to roam the earth again? And now we have all these, it's like, phase 3 of questions and planning and pivoting and all that other stuff. I as you know, I do this video series called That Sucks, Get Back Up. And I think this is sort of like that series, but like the extended version, because every time we get down again, we got to figure out how to get back up and what comes next. But you guys have implemented some really great tactics and strategies like micro planning, the way that you've expanded your networking. I mean, there's a whole series of things that you do that are built around the situation we find ourselves in and that are also structured so that when it changes, you have a more seamless way to change with the situation.
One of the things that is the foundation of what we do at Paradigm is everything has a plan, right? We are a strategic agency first and foremost. We're a web, brand, and strategy marketing agency. And as strategists, everything has a plan. And traditionally, a plan was like a long-term, like the big picture. And then last March, we were opening up the window and throwing them right out. And then we were like, what? The rules had changed overnight. We were deciding, and each business, I called it our Moses moment because businesses were so like in shock. They were looking to grab a robe and have somebody guide them through the desert because the, stuff had just gotten real and they didn't know where to start. And being that we were focusing primarily on professional services, I mean, there was such an amazing opportunity to do that. Our friends that were in restaurants, our friends that were in services that were like face-to-face services, like massage therapists or things like that. I mean, they had a whole different other struggle. But in the professional services place, we had to look at what was happening now, react to it, which is what we call micro planning, right? We had to look at what was happening in the next couple of weeks because what happened, especially in the beginning, Rachel, right? You could look at what was happening in 2 weeks, and then in 2 weeks it was no longer relevant because things were moving so fast and shifting. A year in, we are seeing how things have settled a little bit. So now you have like the luxury of 4 to 6 weeks. So it's always good to have that big plan to go back to. What we came away from all of this were strategies that we're applying now, because what worked before doesn't work now.
We created all these strategies. We pivoted to a digital world, right? We started a digital networking group. We started more video content. We started more digital ad strategies. We have a million SOPs now and funnels set up from a digital standpoint that works for the virtual environment. And what I'm wondering is, how relevant is that going to be in April, May, June? I know that what worked pre-pandemic,
2021, right?
But what worked pre-pandemic is not going to work.
Right.
What worked during the pandemic is not going to work. And so we're going to have to throw out the plans, I think, again, and start all over with new strategies, which is kind of depressing because we worked so hard and we're all burning out.
You talked, Rachel, about, how you have to sort of revamp and what those strategies might look like in the next few months. What do they look like? I know you're keeping on top of the trends and what's changing, but how do you do that? And what do they look like?
So I don't know what they look like yet, but I think I have a plan for the processes to follow to figure it out.
Yeah.
And there's a couple things. So there's almost this, the concept of evergreen content. You can say it whenever you want, and it'll be relevant for years to come. There's no such thing in most cases around the pandemic of evergreen content. Like, unless we're going back to 1918, which isn't relevant then, it's not going to work. So there's a couple tried and true processes that I'm latching onto with my claws and holding on for dear life and hoping that they guide us through this. And the first is collaboration and partnership marketing. So when funds are tight, it's a great opportunity to find a strategic partner who has the same target audience as you, where you can share the cost of advertising, share the burden of time, and go to market at a cheaper rate with a wider reach. Mm-hmm. So, I've been doing collaborative marketing and partnership marketing on steroids since the pandemic started, and I don't think I'm going to stop anytime soon. I think that's an evergreen concept that will be relevant in any market. And have benefits, of course, if you choose the right partner or not. The second is micro planning. Vicki mentioned, I used to tell my team, if you are marketing for something, we're planning 6 weeks, 8 weeks out, we're starting the plan. 6 weeks out, we're going to market. We have the event or the campaign or whatever. And then there's a 3 to 4 week follow-up strategy. Yeah. Vicki's heard me say it 100 times. I'm going to squeeze every piece of juice from that orange. Like, if we run a campaign, you follow through until like it is a mash on the floor. Right. All right.
We've gotten really good at that.
And so it'll be a 3-month campaign. That's not possible anymore. Right. When the pandemic started, we did this webinar called Marketing Through a Crisis. That webinar, right place, right time, brought in 600 or 700 attendees and closed us a ton of business in late April. I tried to run the same webinar again in June, 6 weeks later, and I was struggling to get people to show up. That's how fast the message.
Well, we got 150. It wasn't this.
Okay, but it wasn't
plus.
600 or 700. Yeah. It was
you
admirable.
Got spoiled.
I was very spoiled. So I think there's this concept of micro planning. What can you do 3 to 4 weeks out, and then stop and readjust? The other thing I'd say is the hook. There is, we were actually, one of our podcasts, we talked to a business psychologist and talk about consumer psychology. There's this fight or flight response right now happening with in general, always with people, but that's why we are, our brains like are chemically made up to pay attention to danger over something else, which is why we all have to watch the news, even though there's terrible stories, which is why we have to rubberneck on the side of the road when there's an accident. We want to look at the danger because we want to be aware of it. The pandemic has, at the time, created this hyper focus of danger, but it's also creating other levels of consumer pain, so to speak. This makes me sound like a horrible person, but let me take a step back. So when you're in marketing and you're doing the consumer pain funnel, you have surface level pain. At the middle of the funnel, you have financial pain, and at the bottom of the funnel, you have emotional pain. When they're going through their buying, marketing to sales process, they're journeying through that funnel at different stages. Their pain is hyper focused now on things that are relevant to the environment, whether that is the pandemic and how do I get through it, or how do I avoid business burnout for my employees, or how do I take the next right steps? What I'm finding is I'm trying to have conversations with other business owners and leaders and people who are in our audience on a weekly basis. What are you worried about? What is stressing you out? What are you focusing on right now? Because if you can pay attention to that, you can actually leverage your marketing strategy and your sales strategy at like a hyper level that we might not be able to do outside of this environment.
You're basically like conducting mini focus groups constantly.
Yeah, exactly. But you have to do them fast because what the challenge is now is not going to be the challenge in the next 2 weeks. So I would say micro planning, partnership marketing, and finding the hook are the 3 things that are not going to change for us no matter what environment comes.
Yeah, what comes out of those 3 elements may look different weeks to 2 weeks to 2 weeks to 2 weeks, but the process to get to the end result is sort of the same.
Yeah. And I will also, I think we can reasonably anticipate that things like content marketing are not going to change. I don't have the stats in front of me, but like video consumption is up astronomically. That might go down. Kerry and I have been talking about this, podcast versus video.
Right.
And right now video is doing so well because we're all behind our desks in our houses or in our homes looking at video. But when we start traveling again, YouTube, it's going to switch. Well, not out the window, but definitely going to go down compared to podcasts. So how do we, as we're creating all this content now, how do we plan for that when there's going to be a medium change?
Right.
And I think it's kind of, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket is the challenge right now.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's why we opted to do this via video and audio, but we are commuting again and people are listening to podcasts, perhaps more than they are watching them. Then that's a great opportunity and that's a great kind of content to have. But when you are posting, perhaps portions for additional content on different platforms or to promote, having that video element is what's drawing people in right now.
Well, one good piece of content can take you miles, right? And if you've ever heard us speak before, Rachel or myself, we always talk on average it takes 9 to 13 touches for someone to build trust and engage with your brand. So a great piece of content you could get miles out of. So where all of this sounds so overwhelming, a good piece of content chopped up and put in the right place, right? So we're recording this now. This can be an audio opportunity. This is a video opportunity. This could be microbytes of content. Some of this content can be grabbed and used in social media. So where it's overwhelming, you can also breathe and know that when you're moving every week with new content and a new, trying to reach your audience, one good piece of content can have amazing results and can be used in so many different ways.
Tons of opportunity.
Kerry, what are you, you play in the world of video more than we do. What are you seeing with how it's changing and what's to come?
It's interesting. It's getting, and it depends a little bit on what platform you are. For example, I don't put a ton, and if you follow me on Facebook, please don't take offense to this. I don't put a ton of time into my Facebook content. Nevertheless, I have seen that growing at a rate that I didn't really expect. And, you know, as we mentioned, Rachel, I'm in the process of transitioning an old audience to a new one from my news background to my business ownership background. And there's some calibration that comes with that. But it is, you know, that was sort of like what we put on the back burner. And when we have stuff, we'll post it there. I'm finding the videos are gaining traction there in a way that I had not anticipated. LinkedIn, however, is insane right now with video. I mean, if I do a post about an event that I'm doing, and it's a picture and some text, the difference between the engagement and the reaction that gets, if I do even a 30-second video about the same event, is extraordinary. And part of it is, right, how you use hashtags, and are you including the right people, and do you have people to support your post, and how often are you putting content out there? You know, the algorithms are changing constantly, but we always know that regular content helps them regardless of what small nuance has changed over the last 2 weeks. And make no mistake, they're changing more than weekly, they're changing daily. So the video content on LinkedIn is through the roof. That said, it's also really crowded with video content. And so it's harder and harder to break through. If you have not put out video content yet, and it's something that you're considering doing, there's still some space for you there to cut through the noise, but your videos have to be good. You have to be interesting. You have to be compelling. People have to like you. If you are unlikable on video, you're not doing yourself any favors. I know, Vicki, I know. Can
I tell you why I'm laughing? I spent all this time working with Kerry to put a video together for an ad that I was the host on, and we A/B tested it with a Canva video, like 3 slides, and the Canva video crushed it. Everyone hated me.
That's not true.
I mean, the data speaks for itself, is all I'm going to say.
Well, perhaps you need to have, you know, Kerry was just about to say, you know, you have, aside from likability, you also have to.
I was told I didn't smile enough. I have one of those resting faces.
You want to know? I did
a resting bee face.
I did a post probably about a year ago that actually got a lot of play about resting bitch face. It's a big thing. Know it because I would catch myself sometimes on the monitor when I was in news, and I'm like, holy shit, I look angry.
Well, if we're talking about resting face, my very best friend, all through college, she was my college roommate. Whenever she would think, and for the people listening can't see this face, she wouldn't realize that she would just go like this. Every time she was thinking, her like lip would curl, and she was like thinking so hard. And I see her doing that. I'm like, stop it on video.
We know
Stop thinking.
The thing about video, and I talk about this with my clients all the time, it's what may look like a neutral face in person, like the I mean, it's just a mess. The camera's a cruel mistress. So I always actually suggest, if you're sitting on camera, I know she is a bitch. She's not your face, it's the camera.
She adds weight to you. She makes you look pale.
She's like your frenemy. Oh, yes,
without a filter.
The camera, I'm going to make you look like ass. But I actually will do a slight upturn, like not a big grin, but if I do just a slight upturn with my mouth, it actually looks neutral rather than angry. But sort of, we went off the rails there.
Look at Rachel Stratum.
No, I do. I'm gonna like.
Let's be clear. How many of us have ever looked at ourselves as much as we have this year?
I actually read an article about plastic surgery is on the rise. Besides you, Kerry.
Yeah. I'm sitting here like I'm on meetings and I'm like,
all right, like most of my meetings with you ladies, this is going in the wrong direction. Okay, let's get back to
well, what's next? Apparently, if we could get a BOGO for like some sort of, you know, whatever, we're good to go. But moving back to
the video component, here's the thing. If you use it correctly, there is a huge opportunity for growth there. Remember this though, and then come back in 2 weeks and I'll tell you if I've changed my mind. But right now, this is where it stands.
Because micro planning.
People are so stressed. Exactly. Full circle. People are so stressed out and so overwhelmed and there's so much going on, and like there's a million posts here, and then Twitter saying that if you can somehow incorporate something into your video, it doesn't mean that it has to be goofy and funny and all like we are today, but if you can incorporate something into your video that hooks onto an emotion, whether it's anxiety, maybe it's outrage, humor, or inspiration. And I would say right now, like anxiety and anger, we all get it. Like we're bombarded with those messages a million times a day. If you can provide content where people can either find some inspiration or some humor, people are very drawn to that right now.
Also, nostalgia is a big one.
Nostalgia, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but my husband ordered an original Nintendo, and that's what we did on Saturday. Off the rails again. But yeah, I think that's a really great point. The other interesting thing is all of the different platforms that are coming out now. It's so funny. When Clubhouse came out, I was convinced that we are going full circle, people. We're all about on-demand content right now. And now we're going to go full circle back to the days of cable where you can only hear something when it's being spoken about. I wasn't buying it. And Kerry was arguing with me. And I think in this case, I'm not going to say this often, but Kerry was right on the value of Clubhouse. But
to be invited into Clubhouse also. So then it creates this like I want to go too.
And yeah. And there actually, it was just on iOS and it's launched now on Android. So everybody has access to it.
But tell them the appeal of live and what your argument was to me about.
The cool thing about live, well, right now Clubhouse is growing at an enormous rate rather. However, it's still not like a TikTok or an Instagram where there's billions of people on it. So it gives you the opportunity to really get in front of people who you may have never had the chance to hear live unless you paid, thousands of dollars for a ticket. Like you can get in a room with Gary V, or you can get in a room with some celebrity's CEO. And oh my gosh, if you raise your hand and ask a great question, they'll bring you up on stage and you'll get in front of thousands of other people that are live. Now, what is the live component? The live component is cool because there is somewhat of that, like, I'm waiting on the edge.
How are they going to mess up? Who's going to trip?
Are they going to drop an F-bomb? What kind of stupid stuff is somebody going to say? I know.
Or is their kid going to walk in naked, like in my situation? Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And will they talk about it? And I will, just for the record.
Remember like when that BBC guy, the guy was on the news at BBC and the kid comes in and it was the talk of the news. Now that stuff happens and nobody bats an eye.
His kids had clothes on. He was a lucky one.
You'd be lucky if, my 3-year-old didn't like sit behind me and just drop a deuce in front of all of us right now. But my point is, but you know what?
And you were worried about me?
Would you like that? Not that part, but it's that raw authenticity. Not the poop. But the point is, you never know what's going to happen.
The excitement of the unknown, right? And the disaster, the impending disaster. Our brains are
that caveman brain. The caveman brain.
Also, you don't. There's no editing. This is authenticity at its purest form. There is.
How refreshing is
whatever
that? That's actually super refreshing because everything is so engineered. Everything is so like.
It's the same component when you do live video, whether it's LinkedIn or whether it's Facebook or whatever, Instagram, those live streams are always prioritized on those platforms because they know that people love watching live, and it's for a number of different reasons. It's because it offers an ability to connect. It is extremely authentic, and because you're waiting to see what happens.
So in the last, that's amazing points. In the last 5 minutes, let me just switch gears for 1 second and let's talk about this concept of business burnout and how are we all going to keep it together for the next 6 months or next however long this is. One thing that I recommend is I'm having a wildly hard time being strategic especially, I don't know about who's listening to this and where, but when it's 3 feet of snow on the ground, we can't go out. We're still stuck in our house. There's no end in sight. Like, I want to go to the sun so badly, it hurts.
Right.
And so how do you take a break? How do you get your mind right? How do you get out of the reactionary process of the day to day and make sure that you're actually working smart and not just hard? Because I find that without stepping back, having collaborative meetings, having creative sessions, it's really hard to do that. And so this concept of live, millennials have always had this pleasure, but we all are mostly behind a computer now. It's a lot easier to email someone, text someone, send a video than it is to say, let's sit down and have a conversation, right?
Mhm.
And one of the things that I've been trying to do in my behaviors, and it's hard to keep up with it, is have meetings with people instead of emailing them something. So for example, in my company, I'm trying to train someone to kind of handle a new piece of our business. And it's so easy for me to either just do the tasks myself or send it to them in an email, and then they're not educated and they do it inappropriately or wrong. And that's not their fault. It's my fault because I didn't spend enough time speaking with them. And so one of the things I've been doing to combat that is sitting down and scheduling time, just you, that person and me, or you and me, and let's talk about what we want to talk about. Let's figure out next steps. Let's be collaborative. I think it's so important to schedule weekly for micro planning strategy sessions with your team and or partners or collaborators so that you can talk things out and figure out your next steps. What are your guys' thoughts on how to avoid this burnout mentality?
I would say one of the first things that I've either evolved into or have accepted is this Zoom culture is always going to be part of my business mix now, always. I mean, there's undeniable efficiencies that have come from Zoom, and being the director of client engagement, I can now qualify in a way and reach KPIs that I could have never reached before, because now I can say, instead of spending 2 hours, a half hour to a meeting, an hour for a meeting, because if you've driven there, you're not really going to spend a half hour and then a half hour back. And, yes, you try and plan and stack meetings when you can. But here now, in a half hour, I can qualify and see if somebody is the right person for me to continue to have a conversation with. And those undeniable, efficiencies are now part of my mix. With that being said, I'm starting to think, all right, and Rachel, we just talked about it a little bit yesterday. What's going to happen when we go live? Like, how I'm going to now be more selective, and how does that affect in business burnout today? Because I have hope that I will be live by the end of this year somewhere in front of people.
As long as the kids are back to school, I can handle it.
And there's part of, something unexpected came out of this. There's part of it that I really like about being, where I'm not in a car putting 1,000 miles on a month, just going locally. And here I'm getting stuff done. I mean, Kerry, you're a million miles from East Jabip, and you were putting hundreds of miles a week on your car, so
my car is a 2018 and it has over 100,000 miles. So that gives you an idea.
Yeah, totally. So with that, like, how do I avoid that burnout? Is one, I think of what tomorrow will bring. And I'm always trying to, for me, I'm very much about connecting. I connect with people all the time. I probably do a lot more connecting sometimes than I should in a day.
So it's really about how can you apply the lessons you learned to the next phase, right? Because there's some good things that came out of this. Actually, now that you're saying this, Vicki, I think one of the things we should all do as a team is sit down and write down like what's worked as a result of this, and what do we want to keep moving forward.
Yeah,
that might be a really interesting exercise.
I would agree.
No, but I mean, like, the burnout is real. I will tell you, I have never worked harder in my whole entire life, but I've also never been productive in a way that is so meaningful that actually charges me back up too. So, I think it's part of understanding what makes you drive. I think it's really important to make sure that you take breaks. My son is really big on the Pomodoro method, like work for 25 minutes and take 5 minutes off. And And there's actually a timer that you can download for your desktop that teaches you. And you both know me and to the world, I get a little, ooh, shiny. I like distraction. I will go run
No.
in the direction.
Absolutely
Part of my
not.
charm.
No, I would never. With that said, it's time for us to go. No.
Yeah, but I
So
think
be
it's
quiet.
important to take breaks and to recharge
Yeah.
and also step out of your vacuum.
100%.
If you're always talking to people internally, sometimes it's just really nice to get other people's, part of the thing that Rachel and I had talked about is pay attention to what other people are doing. When you plan
100%.
in a vacuum,
Yeah.
it all starts to sound great to you. And then you ask your friend and you're like, that's a dumb idea.
It's the group think. It's the group think.
Yeah.
But I just want to jump in really quickly. And this isn't so much as a tactic or strategy as it is. I find truly, and I naturally am sort of an introvert. I really am. But what I enjoy, like Vicki and I do this LinkedIn Live every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern, and we talk about networking. We talk about, some of the things that we'll be talking about this podcast, but it's all live. And
anything can happen.
Anything can happen, but I really enjoy, that's like my favorite outside of the podcast. That's my favorite half hour of the week. I get to connect with you and with Rachel when she's available and some of our other partners. And I think, again, it's one of those things that if I didn't have it scheduled, it wouldn't happen. But I find when I have that moment, even if we're talking business, it sets the tone for the rest of the day. And so thank you, Vicki, for being a part of that. Thank you, Rachel, for helping us get it set up. With that, our podcast episode is about to wrap up. We appreciate those of you who have been listening and perhaps watching. We hope that you will join us for the next episode of The Mavens of Marketing. Thank you. It's a teaser. Coming up on the next episode of The Mavens of Marketing, isn't SEO the most frustrating thing in the world? Something you have to constantly stay on top of. And it's super nerdy, by the way. Well, guess what? Stress no longer. Pam Ongst of Pam and Marketing is joining us to talk about all of those insider secrets we need to know to make sure that our content is SEO optimized. I promise you, we'll make it interesting. See you then.